Mr. Chair, you are live.
Thank you. This regularly scheduled meeting of the Annapolis Planning Commission shall now come to order. It is Thursday, September 3rd, and it's a few minutes after 7. Madam Hook, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Waltman,
Present.
Mr. Imes,
Here.
Mr. Klein,
Here.
Ms. Butler,
Here.
and Mr. Sale.
Mr. Sale is on vacation. We have a quorum though, nonetheless, and so we can proceed. The first item will be to review the agenda. I would propose moving the approval of the Park Place opinion further up right after we review and approve minutes from the last meeting. And if that's agreeable to everybody, I'll make that motion.
Second it.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. The first order then will be to review and approve the minutes from September 26th. August 26th, if I'm not mistaken, right. Do you need a minute to review them?
I'll make a motion to approve the August minutes, August 26 minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion, any modifications, additions, or deletions?
The piece that you mentioned, Bob, about the additional thing we voted on for the Park Place, that was additional condition that was voted down. That's my recollection too, as you wrote it.
It's in there. I just put it,
Oh, is it?
yeah,
Okay,
I put it underneath of the initial vote, but I moved it up. Mr. Wallman asked me to move it up, so I moved it up.
My recollection is that the motion on the parking lot surface was raised before we voted on the rest of the package as a whole. And so I just thought it made sense to have it in the right chronology.
Okay.
Well, you made the initial motion, but it didn't move forward because Diane intervened, but
Right.
I agree with you 100%. So I moved it up.
Right. It was my initial motion was not seconded, and then Ms. Butler proposed the surface parking lot change, and we discussed it and voted, and then we moved on to, I reintroduced my motion for to approve with the suggested conditions. And then it got a second and we voted and it was approved 3-2. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. With any further discussion about the state of the minutes? I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Okay. The next order will be for us to review the opinion on the Park Place Hotel, the modification to the Park Place plan development. There was an opinion that was drafted by Mr. Beard. Is there somebody who could share a screen and show that?
I will do that forthwith here.
The standard it's in very standard form. Could I ask you to just scroll down slowly but steadily? I noticed that Lowe's is still misspelled. My recollection is, I'm sorry to be such a pedant, but it's Loewe. But anyway,
Actually, I don't think there's an E on the end.
Okay, well, okay. Reasonable pedants can differ.
Well, if there is an E on there, then the Google has it wrong too, because
Okay,
shows.
not a problem. Not
And
a
actually,
problem.
if you search for Lowe's Hotels,
Mhm.
it's LOEW.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine with me. Maybe I'm stuck on the old English spelling. All right, let's see. We had hearings on 2 evenings. Applicant presented testimony. Members of the public had their opportunity to comment. We did receive comments. Okay. And those comments are made part of the record, correct, Ms. Hook?
Yes.
Okay. Could you scroll down? These are standard conditions to any application.
So I think it's,
Okay, now starting with 18 is our additional conditions, which were made a part of the approval. Okay. Number 22 has been changed since from the original draft. And I think that we just want to be clear that the sidewalk from the brick portion of Park Place all the way to Lowe's Access Road shall be buffered from the curb by 5 feet. Is this condition clear?
you want me, I can share, so I have a set of pictures just to make it crystal clear.
Would you like to share that?
Sure. So this is the overview map. The Lowe's Access Road is up here. Park Place is down on the lower right, and Admiral Cleaners is here. So a picture of the brick. So this entrance to Admiral's I don't know whether it's entrance or exit, but the southernmost curb cut demarcates the brick sidewalk that's currently in front of Park Place. And the buffer, so I took a picture there, the buffer of the sidewalk to the end of the curb is more or less 5 feet. So the length of this ruler, this tape measure is 5 feet. So the part that is mentioned in condition 22 is from this curb cut to the Lowe's Access Road. And there are 2 pictures of the buffering there now. In front of Admiral Cleaners in that section, you can see the current sidewalk is about 2.5 feet from the edge of the curb. So clearly we would like that the sidewalk essentially moved to the end of that tape measure. And then for the section from this curb cut, the northern curb cut up to the Lowe's Access Road, it's roughly, sort of depending on where you are, about 2.5 feet from the edge of the roadway. There's no curb here, but I think I measured it from the point where a vehicle could drive, and that's right up against the curb, or here at the grass line. So this sidewalk has to be relocated to the 5 feet, the end of this tape measure. And I would assume the standard, this is not a compliant width sidewalk. I would assume they would make this sidewalk the standard of 5 feet, which is the city's standard. We don't say that, but I assume that would be the case.
Yes, well, it would have to abide by Department of Public Works regulations.
Correct.
If there's no objection, may I suggest that this this be attached as an exhibit? I believe it's G, or whatever the
I
the
think it
next
would be,
one would
this would be H.
It would be H. Then I would entertain a motion that this exhibit be included. I don't think would need to be a motion. I would just say, if you could forward this to Ms. Hook, so that it could be made a part of the record, so that we're very clear. If it is the sense of the commission that that was indeed our sense when we discussed buffering the sidewalk from traffic on Taylor Avenue, then is the condition number 22 in the opinion, is it acceptable?
It is to me. I think it's very clear.
Okay, Mr. Klein, could you bring up 22 again? I mean, the opinion? Thank you. Now, this document has been reviewed by Mr. Sale, and he voted to approve it. If there is any motion, I'd entertain a motion, and any discussion about this opinion.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion about changing or clarifying any aspect of the opinion? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to ask for a vote. All those in favor of approving this opinion, please say aye.
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 Are there any nays? Are there any abstentions? Okay, it is approved then by 5-0. Thank you. We can move along. The next item on our agenda, can we remove? Thank you. The next item on the agenda is a presentation by Melissa Maddox Evans and her cohort, a new employee at the Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis, also known as HACA. So the floor is now yours, Ms. Maddox Evans, and we look forward to this. Perhaps somebody would post the, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Waldman, for inviting us today, and thank you to all the commissioners for providing us the opportunity to speak with you. We look forward to this conversation and to any questions you may have, and we're excited to share about our plans at the Housing Authority. And so I have been at this Housing Authority nearly a year now, almost a year. Come October, and we have certainly undergone lots of changes so far, and we look forward to continual change as we move forward. And I also have with me presenting Ms. Jennifer Adams. She's a new employee. She's our new Director of Development, who is the lead on all of our redevelopment projects. She comes to us from New Orleans, where she worked for several years at the Housing Authority there and has a great deal of experience in rebuilding communities. So we're very excited to have her join us. And so we're just going to talk about how the housing with regards to the housing units that the City of Annapolis Housing Authority provides, how we're on the verge of really changing, making some very serious changes to our communities and to our homes. And we're very excited about the progress that's up ahead. So you can transition to the next slide. We seek to address some of the issues that are in our communities. Housing authorities are tasked when they're created for a jurisdiction to be able to address any of the housing needs that are present within that jurisdiction. And with that, we consider many factors: the growth of the community. We consider the employment issues, what type of wage disparities there may be. Most recently, we are forced to consider pandemic issues and its impact on housing authorities. Usually we get calls or emails daily with regards to members of the community or even outside the community that want to come and explore housing with our homes. And we have noticed a marked uptick in requests for housing assistance from people from all walks of life who normally may not have needed housing assistance, but now do. So I can say our requests have easily doubled as far as inquiries about housing assistance. So there's definitely a need for affordable housing opportunities. So we consider all sorts of things, the costs of housing in a particular area, and also other ancillary related needs like transportation, education, all of those things fall into play. So our overall goal is to provide workforce housing in mixed use and mixed income communities. You know, traditionally speaking, housing has been subject to, for reasons that are definitely not purposeful, but as the area changes, serving just primarily, particularly here in the city of Annapolis, the majority of one demographic, and that being the African-American community, which is good because the housing is needed. But we're here to serve all communities, people from all backgrounds that need it. And we believe the more balanced our communities are, the better that they are for all persons involved. So there's definitely a need for housing of the income bracket that we serve, that's 30 to 80% of the area median income. But what we find is there's a need for housing after what we call after HACA, in that 80% to 150% of the AMI range. So that once someone has explored our opportunities and finds that they want to enter back into the private market, that there are viable options for them. Next slide. So housing authorities can explore a number of options when it comes to redeveloping their communities. The most prominent program, and you can go back to the former slide, is the a rental assistance demonstration program. And go back one more slide. And this program was promulgated by Congress in 2012 under the Obama administration. And it essentially enables housing authorities to convert their public housing stock to a project-based Section 8 model.
No. Go back a slide.
Yeah, and why that's important is because under the traditional public housing model, public housing units are bound by declarations of trust and annual contribution contracts with HUD. And so what that means is that we legally do not have the authority to leverage our properties. So although we may own it, the only thing we can do is manage them and receive and maintain, administer the subsidy that's attached to the units. What the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program allows for is for that declaration of trust to be released from the property, so that HUD does not have that legal tie to the housing authority, and allows us to enter into other arrangements with nonprofit developers, private developers that are focused on affordable housing, and to be much more flexible than we're able to be under the traditional public housing model. And so many housing authorities across the nation are pursuing that. And it's actually the goal of HUD to encourage housing authorities to move from the traditional public housing platform to this project-based Section 8 model. There are, of course, other project-based programs that are not RAD related that a housing authority can explore, which essentially has some of the same requirements. There's also the tenant-based voucher program, which many people might be familiar with when they think of Section 8, where a tenant can take a voucher, which has rental assistance tied to it, and go into the community and find housing of their own, of a willing landlord that will be willing to rent to them under the program. It creates consistent housing assistance for their tenant, but it also creates a great and consistent revenue stream for the landlord. And so it's a great program from the landlord perspective. So we're constantly looking at ways to try to recruit more landlords to participate so they can understand the benefits of the program. There's a low income housing tax credit program, which is a program that enables us to pursue funding sources from investors. The IRS has allowed for benefits and actually credits that can be issued to investors that are willing to invest in affordable housing. And they can provide either 9% tax credits, which are competitive, which you have to apply for. There's also a set aside amount of 4% tax credits for a particular state. And so housing authorities have to compete with other entities, other housing authorities, and other nonprofit developers for the 9% tax credits. And so those are a bit more difficult for us to acquire. For example, we applied for 9% tax credits when we were going to create the Newtown 20 project, the funding platforms, but we didn't get those tax credits. They were given to Baltimore City and other jurisdictions. There's a number of formulas and things attached to that program that determine whether or not you're awarded, that were pretty much outside of our control. And so 9% actually allows for more funding. So we would have added more units to Newtown 20, for example, if we received the 9% tax credits. And it also ensures that the property, that tax credit stays in place for about 15 years. And once the credit expires, the housing authority and the other members that enter into the arrangement that to purchase the property can actually reacquire the property from the investors under a right of first refusal. And so, so that's just a very brief overview, and I'll have Jennifer talk a little bit more about the tax credit program in a second. Section 18 is a statute that allows us to enter into demolition and disposition of properties that are far beyond rehab or even substantial rehab renovation. So example, again, Newtown 20. So it was necessary for us to essentially demolish that project. So the Section 18 application allows us to do that when we apply for that to HUD. And you can attach RAD and LIHTC, which is the tax credit program, and project-based vouchers to Section 18 as an overlay. Choice Neighborhood Initiative is a program that I think this body should explore and begin considering. And I would like to, at some point, maybe later this fall, just do a presentation with some of our consultant partners just on that program. That is a very expansive program, which has both an implementation grant and a planning grant, which allows for essentially neighborhood transformation. So from our perspective, a community like the Eastport and Harbor House communities would be an awesome candidate for a Choice Neighborhood program. It entails very elaborate and extensive partnerships with the local city, for example, local educational institutions or healthcare facilities, because the goal is to be able to re-envision a community as the local constituents believe it should be. And so, but it's a great program to explore, and I think we should do that. Jennifer, would you like to add anything about the tax credit program?
You did a pretty good job of covering it. You know, I think maybe for this group, it's good to hear that the state allocates the credits And they change their policy, or they have the opportunity to change their policy through the qualified allocation plan every year. And you know, the policies that they make in there has a lot to do with whether or not the 9% credit is competitive for a place like Annapolis versus a place like Baltimore, or we need to go seek the 4% credit. Low-income housing tax credits are kind of the lifeblood of affordable housing, I think, maybe across the nation. But you can think of it kind of from a financing standpoint, that the 9% credit gives you almost a 90% sort of down payment on the cost of your redevelopment project, somewhere between 80 and 90% ideally. Whereas the 4% credit, which is not competitive, but as you might guess, it's about half of the 9%, it gives you 30 to 40% of a sort of down payment in order to finance that. So the state allocates the tax credits to a developer. The developer can basically sell or syndicate those credits to an investor who needs to offset profits. And they use the money from the sale of those tax credits in order to, again, kind of put the down payment on the low-income housing tax credit financing of the project.
Thank you. Next slide. So the reason why we are pursuing redevelopment are several reasons. One, as I said earlier, the public housing platform was deemed by HUD to be not as stable a funding stream, and for several reasons. And what has happened is that because of the inconsistency in how the program is funded, which is funded by Congress every year, it has traditionally been viewed as an unstable funding platform. And so HUD is encouraging housing authorities to move from the public housing platform and to more stable funding platforms like the project-based voucher program and RAD programs. Also, obviously, because of the instability in funding throughout the decades, there has been a incredible backlog of capital improvement needs for public housing authorities across the nation in the billions of dollars, and the $26 billion figure is low at this point. It's probably closer to 50 billion nationwide, in which many of these structures have gotten to the point where it's beyond normal upkeep. And many of them need substantial renovation or demolition and new construction to build. And so HUD has determined that we need to seek public and private partnerships and not just rely on the federal subsidy platform to be able to provide housing, preserve housing, create new housing opportunities. Next slide. So we're approaching our redevelopment in phases. We are starting with phase 1 and have already begun with Newtown 20, and that's scheduled for demolition this week. We had to go through an elaborate approval process with HUD, which took several months to do. We have to come before this body, for example, on the local level, and other entities with the city to be able to gain the necessary approvals for our applications. And so that's a 4% tax credit deal, totaling a bit over $24 million, 11 funding sources. Our developers, Penrose, is a great deal of experience in affordable housing. They helped us actually with our Oberry Court, College Creek communities a few years ago, and they have just a great deal of experience, and we're excited to work with them. So we anticipate that to take 2 to 3 years for completion. We've also begun our process to redevelop Lum. We anticipate that be a substantial rehabilitation project in which we engage in renovations with a tenant in place program. It is the majority of the tenants are senior senior and disabled tenants. And so it's our goal to be able to have the least a bit amount of disruption as possible in that community with regards to relocation. So we will be relocating tenants within the buildings and renovating as we go. So we project that that project will be about 21 million, and we're going to pursue 4% tax credits for that project also, and as well as a RAD, the RAD program with that. So we anticipate that to take about 3 to 4 years from where we are right now. We're in the process of finalizing our memorandum of agreement with the developer, who's the community builders. And so they're a nonprofit developer with a lot of experience in Maryland. And so we're excited to work with them. They've done several senior projects in Baltimore and in other places. And so we're glad that they are on board with us. We have mixed finance properties that were developed several years ago, in which there's a blend of public housing, project-based Section 8 and LIHTC units within the development. And so with those mixed finance projects, we actually as an entity have the right of first refusal when the terms are come due as far as the tax credits are concerned. And that will be for our one, I believe, Annapolis Garden, that will be in a few years, maybe about 3 years or so. So that's coming up soon. So we're now considering what our options are and looking at how we want to approach handling that when the time comes. And apologies, there's some fire trucks going by.
I have a question about the mixed projects.
Mm-hmm.
Is the allocation sort of down to the particular unit, or is it just some percentage
Yes.
of units, or?
Yes, it's a particular units, and I don't have the exact breakdown for you right now, but there's a certain number of public housing units, and they're public housing units, and they're and same for each program. So
Are they generally all distributed through? So like with
yes,
respect to
so
Annapolis Gardens, there might be one here, one there, one there. They're all just
exactly. So they're
distributed.
sprinkled throughout. So they're not literally next door to one another, because the goal of the mixed finance properties is to literally mix.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that it's not readily known which unit is tied to which subsidy or funding source.
Gotcha, thanks.
Yes, sure. And so when we anticipate that those properties will undergo a RAD conversion, which will essentially be just changing the funding platform rather than extensive renovations, although there will be some needed because of we anticipate there be some moderate redevelopment on those properties, but nothing as substantial as the other sites. So you can go to the next slide. There will be a phase 2 of our redevelopment projects, in which we will tackle the Eastport Harbor House communities, the Robinwood community, and Bloomsbury Square. And so we plan to seek a variety of funding sources with those communities. And we look forward to seeing great changes with those as well. The reason why we have to do the redevelopment in phases is that it takes a considerable amount of effort to be able to acquire funding sources for each project. It also entails that the housing authority itself be subject to some changes internally, structurally, as an entity. So for example, we have to create legal entities for our various development projects in order to manage the projects. Because that's a requirement of participating in the tax credit program. And the housing authority has to develop a redevelopment arm within itself to be able to continue these projects and more projects, because we're not limited by just our current housing stock. We have the opportunity to grow. And so as we're developing the projects, we are also transforming as a staff to increase our capacity to to be able to handle different projects as we go along. So as a requirement of each project, the development teams, the developers that we're partnering with actually helps train our staff in redevelopment as we go along. And that's actually incorporated into the deal so that our staff is very knowledgeable going forward on redevelopment projects under these new platforms. Next slide. So there are obviously several stakeholders that are involved as we redevelop our properties. Of course, first and foremost are our residents. Our residents are the reasons why we want to redevelop our properties and preserve housing opportunities. And so their input is included at every point in these processes, and it's actually required at pretty much each phase of our redevelopment. So even now, let's say for instance, we're coming up with, we're in initial discussions with the community builders for the Blum project. We, about a month ago, had a meeting with the Resident Advisory Council and the Resident Advisory Board to be able to introduce the developers to them, to give them a chance to ask questions up front, you know, about their intentions and about their history and experience, and also for them to, for the developers to show some examples of what they've done, and to begin getting that dialogue and to get that feedback. So we'll probably be meeting every couple months with the residents as we go along, as we're creating the architectural designs, as we're going through environmental review, as we're creating resident program ideas and options. So resident input is necessary and required all along this process. So of course, we're funded primarily by HUD. And so HUD has to approve every single project that we enter into. So we go through their processes, as well, of course, as you know, the city and local, and if necessary, state approvals, and all of the approvals and things that we have to do for funders, what they require for us to be able to utilize their funding sources. And so as we grow, we are learning about a lot of the issues that we have had to deal with in the past. And we use all of those learning lessons as platforms to grow into the future. And you can move on to the next slide. One of the considerations that as we're making changes and entering into development, redevelopment of our properties are, you know, how can the city help us and the Planning Commission help us, you know, along this journey? And so one of the things that there are just a few questions that I would like to present to the body as we go along, and just things for us to think about. As we go along, you know, what administrative processes can be streamlined to create incentives for affordable housing developers, to create and preserve and expand affordable housing opportunities for workforce families. There's lots of things we could do on the local level to be able to create those kinds of incentives to attract more developers to meet the needs of our constituents. Are there any zoning issues or local ordinances that can be reviewed as we go along this process that would assist us as we have different considerations? In order, for example, in order to do mixed income developments, there'll be a necessity to actually increase the number of units at a particular site. And so what are some issues that we think we'll run across for particular communities that we'll need to begin thinking about right now, if that's something that we're interested in doing? You know, our philosophy is that it's, you know, it's much better to be able to create a more mixed and integrated environments for persons to live in, and not environments where low-income housing is either set aside or in a particular neighborhood. Because it's our philosophy, you know, you shouldn't be able to just flat out determine what type of housing someone lives in simply because of their address. And unless they want to tell you themselves that they receive subsidy for for the units. So it's our goal to be able to create housing that's completely seamless and integrated into the community. What are some measures that we can take to educate our citizens about the need for housing? Yes, even in a city like Annapolis, there's a need for housing opportunities. Issues change, as we talked about earlier, environment changes. And so those are just some things that we can think about ahead of time as far as addressing the housing needs in a particular area. And so those are some of the things that that I just wanted to have us consider. You know, there's a lot of the backdrop behind affordable housing issues is that there historically, and this is just a well-known fact, that been a lot of structural barriers or systemic barriers that are in place that actually have hindered the opportunities under affordable housing. So next slide and last slide, I'll just leave you with or actually not last slide, second to last slide. These are just some examples of how local jurisdictions can enter into different programs, ideas, funding sources, and options to be able to meet the needs of their local community. And so, you know, thinking ahead, you know, how can we create steady funding streams to be able to support some of these projects? Or what type of partnerships do we need to enter into with corporations, with philanthropic entities that could be a benefit to our workforce? You know, persons working at the medical center, for instance, or, you know, we have a large tourism community. How can we ensure that, you know, people that are working within our communities can live as close to their workplace as possible and start thinking of things, you know, from that perspective? And what barriers do we currently have, you know, that prevent us from maximizing those opportunities? So there's just lots of things that a local jurisdiction can explore that would be able to give you the tools that you need to be able to handle whatever the issues are that we believe are important in Annapolis. And lastly, last slide, as I was referring to systemic issues, this is just some helpful reading material. The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein is an excellent book, and The Lines Between Us by a local author in Baltimore gives an awesome historical analysis of housing in this state. And to enable us to see what have been some of the barriers that have prevented us from maximizing affordable housing opportunities. And in the next month, the Anne Arundel Public Library is going to be sponsoring Groundwater Program, which is under the Racial Equity Institute. It's a phenomenal program, but Groundwater talks about systemic issues within housing, education, and other industries, and really helps leaders connect the dots between different barriers that have existed in the different areas, and for us to figure out how can we, one, dismantle those barriers and start connecting the dots so that we could ensure our community members really receive the benefit of all that their local city has for them. And so that's the end of my presentation, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. This was a lot in a very short period of time. Comments, questions?
I have a couple of comments or questions. Thank you so much, Melissa and Jennifer. That was super helpful. I actually was curious about what are the properties you target or you think might be targeted for mixed funding. In the slide that mentions Annapolis Gardens and Oakbury Court, but in terms of Eastport Terrace Harbor House, to me that sort of fits the perfect model for a mixed funding project. So has that been considered?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's actually a perfect model candidate for a mixed income platform and mixed use. And
Right.
yeah, so that's why a program like a Choice Neighborhood Grant would be great to explore, because it actually has a component within the planning grant phase for you to actually create models and ideas that are appropriate for that community to see how that works.
Mhm.
And so that's why I had mentioned the Choice Neighborhood Grant, and several cities have done this in Maryland.
I know, I was gonna say, most recently, the Perkins Homes in Baltimore
Yeah.
that was awarded the Choice grant of $30 million. So of course, I was very excited to hear that. And I think that is a great opportunity. I'm just a little nervous about that because it talks about the surrounding community being distressed. And that's a harder argument to make when just 2 blocks away, you have multi-million-dollar houses.
Right.
But you know this better than anyone, and Jennifer, you do too. So if you think there's an argument to be made for a choice grant, that'd be wonderful. Any other properties that you think might need to be demolished? Robinwood, for instance, under the Section 18 program?
It's a possibility, but it's at this point, it's not likely. We have to still complete our environmental review and our physical needs assessments for those developments, and that will actually determine the level of rehab that's needed, even if it goes to the extent that it needs to be demolished. So we would know concretely after we do the physical needs assessments for those properties. The goal would be to not demolish if it's at all possible to not do that, just because of the level of disruption and the relocation. And
I know that's been a pain watching Newtown 20.
That's very difficult for families.
Oh, of course. It's a lot of relocation.
So, we try to minimize that, but we have to do the physical needs assessments first.
And I think I'm going to hear more about this in the Affordable Housing Task Force, but can you touch briefly on what Community Land Trust is about?
So community land trusts are entities that are created. It's a nonprofit entity that is created for the purpose of preserving a particular area for affordable housing. So let's say it's I guess affectionately known as a gentrification blocker in a sense. So let's say there's a particular area that you like to preserve or ensure that persons within an affordable housing range could qualify for. It could be actually a street in a neighborhood. It could be a section. It could be, that's just determined upon, what the local interests are. You can, that's an entity that ends up putting the land in trust.
In perpetuity or for a time certain?
Yeah, so the land is held in trust in perpetuity to the community land trust. So the community land trust owns the land. The community land trust then leases the land to homeowners, or it can create or build housing and offer housing for renters. If it creates homeownership, the leasehold is granted, the homeowner is granted a leasehold for 99 years.
Okay.
Essentially, they own it for their life, but it's not ownership. And it stays permanently affordable, so that even if the homeowner sells the home, there's a certain, they are limited on the amount of equity they could get from the sale of the purchase, so that the home can remain affordable to the next seller, next buyer. So it enables the homeowner to build their own equity. It's for wealth building, but without, let's say, having an extreme profit for the sale of their house, which then makes it completely unaffordable for the next.
Right.
So, and you can, transfer your home through, inheritance. You can give it to their children. So you essentially own your home, but that's the base of the model. And it's usually like, say, a housing authority, or it could really be any entities that enter into the trust partnership, the city and another entity that creates it. And also members of the board have to be members within the community. And so you have to have a certain number of government officials, public officials, a certain number of persons from the like investment arm, and then certain members from the community on the legal entity that controls the CLT.
Got it. Well, I look forward to learning more about that. That sounds incredibly interesting to me, and it may create some great opportunities here at Annapolis. So thank you.
Great.
I have 3 points. One of them is I would ask you to identify areas in the city which you think are amenable, just even in an imaginary kind of level, but are amenable to things like land trust or land banking, or to other forms in which, other ways in which the housing authority could get active. You know, aside from the big projects that you already own. That's number one. And the reason I ask for that is because I think that it might feed in ultimately into the comprehensive plan. In other words, it could become part of the discussion, which is the purpose of these comprehensive plans.
Right.
The second question I have is probably the most biggest one. It has to do with Eastport Terrace and Harbor House. And what I have heard is that the surrounding community is willing to entertain an increase in densities, numbers of units, if it becomes mixed income. And I must say that I was surprised to see that the number of non-PH, in other words, non-public housing units that exist in some of the more recently renovated projects, which when you ask what we can do to educate and inform the wider community, I think that's a very important point, is that already in some of these communities, you have people who are, you know, on a workforce housing level and not on the affordable housing level. And those numbers, 75 here and 104 over there, are really important numbers. But getting back to Harbor House, yes, it needs to be done. It's more than just on your radar, it's on your schedule. I can only encourage you to move as quickly as you can. And that is because what worries me about that is that if Watergate is rebuilt and is expanded in some way before the city can really react, that it will suck up adequate public facilities. And so that would make it virtually impossible for Eastport Terrace Harbor House to get expanded. Okay?
I see.
Talking about timing here is crucially important. And what I would ask to, I hope that it hurries, it speeds up the timing, is that you consider another presentation like this, maybe not be a public meeting, or it could be a work session, could be any format that we can come up with, where you focus in and advise us on Eastport Terrace Harbor House, this Choice Community Grant, what we can do to move that along, because I think this needs to get into the hopper more quickly than later, because I'm very concerned about the timing of these two things. And I think, and I mean, one can say, put it in terms that that whole area needs to be, quote, master planned. Well, in a sense it does, because they're both affect each other. And when you ask what zoning changes can be made, it's exactly that kind of a thing that we need to look at much more carefully than we have, because, you know, there are consequences to changing zoning. I mean, Eastport Terrace Harbor House, Watergate, and several other areas around the city are R4. Well, what if we started to change the design guidelines to R4 to allow or disallow or whatever, okay? It could change things elsewhere. And I think that we The planning department really needs to look at this among all of the other million things they've got to look at. But I think that one of the initial things to do would be for us and you to focus on Eastport Terrace Harbor House. And if you wanted to do what you're thinking of doing, what changes need to be made, because that stuff needs to get into the comprehensive plan. We need to get that planning grant, and whatever else we need to do that comes up along the way. So that's number 2, okay? Okay? All right. Number 3 is accessory dwelling units. Do you really think that accessory dwelling units are actually going to create housing for people? If they're, what was the last number? 800 square feet? I mean, then when they originally came in, they talked about 1,500 square feet or 18, or I can't remember what the number was, but it was shrunk down to.
It was 1,000.
Huh?
It was 1,000.
Started at 1,000, and what's it down to? 600, isn't it? Or 500 or 600?
I think it's 650.
Okay, but at any rate, it's been shrunk considerably. Okay, so what from your perspective, do you think that the accessory dwelling unit is an opportunity here, or is it really not going to affect workforce or affordable housing?
I think ADUs have to be viewed under the perspective of it is one option of many that we can explore. So it is not the panacea. It will serve a certain group. If we find that there is a need for the demographic that can be served by it, whether it could be singles or it can be maybe some elderly family members or young college students, or whoever we're thinking about serving, if it could help and be an option, it's something worth exploring. I don't think it can be viewed under the light of, this is the thing that's going to really help, a particular issue. And I think sometimes that's where people sort of get off the rails and when thinking about ADUs, because it certainly brings up a lot of thoughts and emotions and perspectives with regards to this, but it's just seen as, it's just one tool, like one method. And I think however the jurisdiction feels that it could be best managed or best utilized, that is totally dependent on the local needs. And so the answer is, it could be, yes. But it should not be seen as, something that'll be the solution.
Well, one of the things that several of us felt was a vacuum or an absence of real knowledge and information, factual information about how it's worked and how it is actually working in other cities. Mr. Klein found a few, blogs and some articles, but nothing that was really helpful in terms of saying, well, here's what you can expect from it. So what the community was left with was, they'll just be built in wealthy neighborhoods and they'll just be used for short-term rentals. And so that's kind of where the conversation lies. All right, just for me and to finish up my long-windedness, I really want to see a work session on Eastport Terrace Harbor House and what needs to be done in the context of the comprehensive plan. And of course, you can coordinate with the inestimable Dr. Sally Nash. Okay.
We would love to do that. And so we're excited. So I really appreciate your suggestions because we are on board with that. And so we have a schedule, but as with all things, it is a framework for us to work with. So we anticipate there may be some projects that move up a little bit and some projects that we thought we were going to engage in right now, maybe we push that one a little bit further. So, but we have to start with a schedule. And so
yes, soon.
So yes, we can certainly do that. And we'll be excited to participate in a planning session or work session. The consultants that assisted with the Perkins project, actually, Ms. Butler, are the same consultants that we just hired.
Oh, great. That's fantastic.
They're very experienced in a choice neighborhood grant implementation and
Okay.
in all of the necessary steps that a jurisdiction needs to do to get that going. And so,
Okay, I don't think we got it. It's affordable housing, and housing in general has been one of the focuses of this comprehensive plan. And this is one of the specifics. And then the first thing I suggested, which were some of the, your other maybe more far out thinking, but unless you give us your imaginative thinking, we won't have the benefit of any thinking. Okay?
okay.
Anything else, anybody? Okay, thank you.
Oh,
very
Bob,
much
I
for
just
your-
wanted to say it's been so great working with Melissa. We're so glad she's on board. It's been, I think, a new day in city HACA relations, and that's good for everyone in the city of Annapolis.
Yeah, I'm getting that impression. Thanks.
You know, I would like to second that and also say, I don't think you were here, Melissa, 1 month, and we had our very first Eastport. Well, we were doing Eastport working together meetings, and you were right there. So we certainly appreciate your engagement with the Eastport community and all you've been doing. And Jennifer, certainly all your experience is so welcome. So thank you.
All right.
Well, we thank
great.
you for this
Good,
opportunity.
thanks for doing
your
this.
kind words.
Yeah,
Thank you.
this was a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is a continuation of the public hearing on the proposed legislation. 1919. Adequate public facilities, specifically auto transportation facilities. This is a continuation of the public hearing. First of all, staff, have you received any comments that need to be distributed to us?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so our sole community commenter is going to be Mr. Arnett. Ross, you're muted, so and I know you like to talk, so thank you.
I have nothing to say.
Well, I will. I think what I'll do is I will, if this is acceptable to everybody's understanding, is I could close the public hearing, and then we could go into discussion, or I could just leave it open and allow us to have dialogue with Mr. Arnett. Let's leave it open. Would anybody like to initiate this conversation, or you want to leave it to me?
Well, I'll just comment that I thought your notes would be a good place to start, and we sort of briefly discussed those on the 26th, and I thank you for putting that summary together.
Yes, thank
Those
you.
are great places to start, and I happen to agree with all of those, and so I don't know if you want to take us through that or.
Okay. Mr. Arnett, have you had the opportunity to review it?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
And I would just quickly say, I understand the points and agree with the points. When you get into discussion, I would just offer two things. Dr. Nash has talked to me, and I think to the commission also, about changing away from this standards where we do measurements A through F. Dr. Nash, you can help me, but I think it's a transit reliability measures or something of that ilk, which I think are more intuitively understandable and get us away from all of these grading of things, which I think largely, including myself, people tend to equate to their report card from elementary school, and I don't think it really is. And not that I saw any Fs or even Ds, but I think that moving to another scalar, and this is the opportunity for you to discuss it, but for the council to consider that. I also take it that the lack of standards in the legislation as it's set forth, and even specificity like who is measuring or providing the information on the number of accidents, is something that needs to be worked out. And I'm glad that Mr. Braithwaite is on the call, and Dr. Nash can also, there is a debate going on within the policymakers with the Office of Law about what goes into code and what goes into regulations. And I think we need to get a greater clarity, and I think this legislation will help us do that. So some of the things that you speak to in your 3 potholes that you bring up here are things that might not be addressed in the ordinance itself, but the ordinance might give the toehold for those things to go into resolution. I'm not totally familiar with where the Office of Law wants to take this, or how much the Department of Planning and Zoning is subscribing to it. It is a new way of doing it. Title II speaks to it right now. Title II in the city code says you can't have regulations after June of 2006. So we'd have to change that. Although it does say you can have it if the code says that you can do regulations. So we need to get all of that clarified. But the main point, the main takeaway for me when you get into your discussions is I agree that there's a lot that needs to be further specified. Standards need to be put in place, but also assignments of who's doing these measures. So I'm very receptive to and looking forward to hearing your discussion and getting your recommendations when they come back to the council and to the rules committee. And now I'll mute myself.
Dr. Nash, do you understand this issue of code or regulation?
Yep. And we are actually, we think it could be a good idea because our code tends to get pretty detailed, and that's fine, except that we have these situations brought about by COVID or whatever, where it's some unanticipated situation where it's like, oh, these people can't bring their trash cans in every day by 8 a.m. because they're no longer opening their business at that time. And there's no leniency in the code to allowing them to take their trash cans in when they open their business, and give them an extra hour, or any time where it's like, why do we make it so prescriptive? Probably because it was in response to a complaint, but I think we can't possibly think of all the situations where we might need some discretion. So we're actually going to try to make some changes in Title 10, which has to do with trash, which is why I use that example. So there would be times when we can give a little bit more discretion if the situation warrants it, but still, 98% of the time people will meet what used to be in the code and is now in the regulations. It's just there might be 2% of the time where it doesn't make sense to be that strict in our application.
Are you comfortable in places in this particular piece of legislation where if it says standards as defined by the Department of Planning and Zoning, for instance?
I would be, yeah.
That reference, and then it's up to you guys to decide, what the specifics are. Are you comfortable with that?
Sure. And the regulations still have to be approved or they have to be published. And Ross, do you know, or maybe Joelle knows, are they approved by City Council, or there is some
It's ambiguous.
process?
It's ambiguous right
process.
now. I think that we'll have to sort that all out. If we get into the City Council approving everything in every instance, we might as well have it in the code. I'm not sure what we've resolved. On the other hand, I think the council, some of these things could get into effectively making policy or changing policy. So that's why I'm looking to the Office of Law. I know you and Joel have been working on this in other venues with the APF, and I'm open to it. I just need to understand it better. And uh, whatever, one place or the other. Bob's comments, I think, are germane in that someplace we need more standards and more definition than what is in the current draft of the ordinance. So
Okay.
that's a
Mhm.
definite deficiency.
I feel fine about this, Bob, because it's kind of how it is now. You know how last time I was saying this chapter of Title 22 is different from every other chapter. And what we need to do now is the chapter refers to the guidelines, and that's what I use now, and my scoping agreements. So it's, it's pretty much what I do now. And I think that works pretty well for the most part. It's just, so I think there needs to be some kind of posting, and city council, at least, like maybe city council doesn't object, or, something like that. I agree with Ross about when it might as well go in the code, but I think we can work out something that will work better than having every little detail in the code and being unmutable.
Okay.
So
Mr.
I would
Brathwaite?
just add, having worked for a regulatory agency for a large part of my career, what Sally just mentioned is the way it happens with federal regs. The regs are promulgated, there's a comment period, everybody gets to weigh in, including the council. If you don't weigh in, it becomes a regulation. Now, the council always has the authority, if they don't like the way the regulation is working, they can come back and change the code and thereby affect the regulation. So it's not like it's gone forever or is immutable. And I think, and again, I value comments from Joelle, the whole point of going to regulations is to add flexibility. And as long as they're promulgated and everybody knows what the rules are, which was one of the big issues with the appeal, and now we have the rules all promulgated, I think that's a fair game. And if it means we have two shelves, one with charter and code and another shelf with regulations, that's how it is at the state level and the federal level. So why not us? I see
Mr.
Joel shaking his
Brathwaite?
head.
Mr. Brathwaite?
Oh, you guys cannot tell how warm and fuzzy and happy I am to hear this conversation here today. Basically, there's rigidity in ordinances that does not exist in regulations. So, for example, one of the APF says that the budget must budget for a specific ratio of police officers. And then my question is, if that's a code section and it's an ordinance, does that then invalidate any budget that does not regulate according to, or does not go according to that APF ordinance? And the problem with that is that law is law. As ordinances, they all have the same effect. And to the extent that they conflict, that wasn't a conflict that anyone intended, that an APF invalidates a budget, a city budget, for example. And then can you tie the future legislators' hands to, you must budget for the police based on this ratio in the APF ordinance? So there are other instances where the specificity hurts, as opposed to having simplicity, which is the code says here, broad strokes. We want to empower planning, zoning to use the most advanced or most supported method to determine adequate public facilities, and then the director of planning and zoning has to defend her regulations by saying, here's my research, I chose this methodology is the best supported methodology that we have to date, and this is why I deployed this methodology. So as the law develops, the director would have the ability to adjust on the fly, to look at new science, to look at the state of the art, without necessarily having to come back and have it be something that the council focuses on, because the council already said what the law was. The law would be that the director would have the discretion, as long as it is the most, let's say it's the most supportable, or at least a very rational approach to determining adequate public facilities. So that sort of discretion it's the discretion that we find in other codes, and the COMAR, for example, is the code the regulations for Maryland, the federal regulations, the Code of Federal Regulations also does the same thing for different federal issues. And you could see where legislator gets too specific in their pronouncements, it creates issues. And I could give you guys examples of that. But again, I think that the best practices moving forward would be to the extent that discretion is warranted, discretion should be granted. And if the discretion is over what the legislators intend, then the legislators would act at that point.
So what I'm getting is that the best way to word legislation like this is to set very clear policy and then let the implementation be directed to the agencies. For instance, let's take the first thing where there is an effort to, one, identify if there are identifiable traffic safety issues within a certain distance from the project. Now, without going much further, is it a good idea to say 150 feet, 250 feet, so that in the legislation? Okay, I got you. And then, so we need, the legislation needs to spell out the policy that safety issues need to be identified by blank. You follow me? It's got to be identified by somebody, and then we dump it all in the lap of the director of planning and zoning to determine a standard by which the intersection is past the point of safety. Am I getting the policy level that just says intersections within 175 feet have to be safe? Am I getting towards where you want to go?
I think it's very simple and effective in doing it that way. I think that the best practice, again, is to hire people that you trust and then trust them with the discretion. And if you limit the discretion by saying it must be rationally, well, all law must be rationally, have a rational basis for it. But again, if you say, for example, in DC, I'll use DC as a criteria. There are 3 ways to value property. One's called income approach, one's called cost approach, and income approach, cost approach, and then their sales approach. So those are 3 ways to value properties. But the regs say the director of the Office of Tax and Revenue, or the law said that the Office of Tax and Revenue can use either of the 3 approaches or any other reasonable approach. So there are certain instances where those approaches wouldn't fairly estimate the value of the land. So by giving you a catch-all in that instance, the director has all the tools that they need. They know that they have the 3 approaches, but in the event that they encounter a unique situation, there's a fault or a way that they could reasonably support their opinion if they don't believe the other approaches capture the full value of the property, for example.
All right. So moving along, when we come into the next issue or pothole, which has to do with these level of service D and level of service E. And I pointed out various problems in the wording, which are pretty irrelevant. But the policy is that no project shall make intersections within a certain distance any worse than they are now. I mean, that's the policy, right?
Right.
And it can be determined by a standard that the director of planning decides, so that we're not saying it's got to be level of service. It can be transit, what did you call it? Transit reliability, or it can be full moon or partial moon, or what, it can be anything.
High tide.
But the point is, the policy is that no project shall make any intersection demonstrably worse than it is now. Okay, and that's simple. That's a policy. Are we making progress? Okay, well.
So can I add though, Bob,
Law, they don't have
when
votes.
this comes to the council,
Yeah.
there's lots of debate in the community about whether it's 250 or 400, whether it's 150 feet. So once we get the recommendations from you about how we fix this up, it'll go to the rules in city government. There will be input. I know there's going to be input coming in from the Eastport Civic Association, and they'll say, no, it shouldn't be 150, it should be a quarter of a mile or whatever it is. And we'll have to sort that through. That sets the policy of how broad out, how far out we want to go. I would also say, and we don't have a mechanism for this now, but it's coming in the discussions with the accessory dwelling units. There's a lot of sentiment on the council that when we take that ordinance up, you rejected it unanimously. There have been a lot of amendments, many of which I think improve it. I'd kind of like to have a system where we could come back to the planning commission. You are the peers that dig in very deep on these things and say, do these amendments fix your objections to this previous state of the legislation to the point where you wouldn't vote against it, you would vote favorably?
Well,
So
I'll leave the machinations and the backroom deals in the city council up to you, okay? We would certainly be
backroom
more than
deals,
willing.
wait a minute.
We
I
would
want
be
that
willing
stricken
to
from
look
the
at,
record.
we would be willing to look at the new accessory dwelling unit legislation. Obviously, all of us here, the four of us here, have thought about it a great deal. So if you can get it back to us, we'd be more than happy to spend our evenings taking a look at it. But coming back to the point at hand, I'm beginning to get somewhat clear as to what it is, or I'm becoming clear as to what it is perhaps this legislation really needs, which is substantial rewriting and simplification. And I leave it to my fellows to come up with, to help me out here with what it is that, how we should proceed. There's no particular pressure of time, I don't think, so that if we wanted to continue this hearing on, that we could. Frankly, I'd be willing to take a look at rewriting some of the stuff and once again making a comment. And then you guys can decide, see if it's moved the ball at all. Is that am I getting any approval of that, Ms. Butler? Okay. David Iams?
Yes.
Okay.
That sounds reasonable.
I get it. Well, I think I'm beginning to get it. What I propose is that I'll do some stuff. If you want me to, I'll send drafts. You can ignore them, until I come up with something final. But I'll send them to Mr. Arnett, maybe to Mr. Brathwaite, and then the three of us can get at least our comments in shape to send to the council, because it's not our job to write this legislation. We don't have time for that, but we do have time to make hopefully educated comments. Anything, Mr. Brathwaite? Anything to add?
Also, just the same way you had a discussion with Hako about work sessions. Work sessions might be a way that Mr. Arnett can achieve what he's thinking about, where he could probably bring together a couple of different commissions that requires input, and he may be able to even prior to offering legislation, and that way everyone could have the best ideas prior to actual referral when the legislation is introduced.
Well, I think I don't want to prolong this. I want to move this. I want to see traffic studies get implemented. I want to see them include more things than they've been including. I'm speaking personally. I want to see them, I want to see clearly identified what it is these studies have to do. And I want to provide the flexibility and the discretion to the directors so that we can move on to a new vocabulary, new standards, new definitions, and really make these traffic studies worth more than they have been. So I don't want to hold this particular piece of legislation up, but I don't think that it'll hurt to hold it off for another 3 weeks. Okay.
Yeah, so let me just add one
Yes,
word at the risk of prolonging this even further. But, you know, so since we've talked about it in that Mr. Arnett brought it up, you know, I think it's important that however we rewrite this, it does not enshrine some methodology that was based in certain development patterns that started 60 years ago.
Right.
And so not to enshrine that. Otherwise, we're just kind of moving deck chairs around on the Titanic, because it makes, you know, it makes an assumption that we're operating under a model that's never going to change, that's we've been operating under for 60 years now. And that's, you know, you guys know my bent that, you know, that's a sort of an auto-centric model. And while, you know, cars aren't going anywhere and we all use them, you know, focusing on the things we were worried about in 1950, you know, that's not the world we live in today. So making sure that we have, we enshrine the flexibility to incorporate new methodologies that make more sense for a current context, both
Right,
in terms of the time and the country and the city and where it is in its growth phase.
What I want to do though is make clear the policies, and they're fairly simple in each of these sections.
Yep.
And then we can debate whether we want that policy to be recommended to the council or not. I really do think that we're on the right track with that. You may disagree with the notion that any project cannot make the adjoining intersections worse than it already is. You can disagree with that policy, but at least we're going to state the policy clearly here and get rid of a lot of the other stuff. Okay. Okay.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Anybody? Okay. So do me the favor that when I send something around, I mean, give me some feedback. Okay. 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 Anything else? I will entertain a motion to continue this public hearing and leave it open.
So moved.
Second.
Any second? Any discussion of that? All in favor of the motion to continue this public hearing till probably till the next meeting?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I too. So that passes. Thank you very much. Okay. And Mr. Brathwaite, I must say that your background is one of the most striking backgrounds of anybody who's ever appeared I've ever seen.
Thank you, sir.
It's almost cinematic.
I think I cannot one up the city attorney though. His background, he's been to Gitmo, he's been to everywhere in service of the law. So I think his background is pretty much more expansive than mine.
I'm talking about that gold circle around, that halo around your head. That's what I'm talking about. All right, you can, you're in a state of something there, grace perhaps, but it's really good. I have to hand it to you. It's better than, you know, boats in the harbor. All right, guys. I'd like to move on to the next item of legislation, which is this small cell
You've got mail.
System ordinance. This is ordinance 20-02920. This is also a continuation of a public hearing. Now we did receive a one comment that I know of, is that the okay, which came from somebody at Naval Support Activity, I guess attached to the Naval Academy. And I actually responded to her and Dr. Nash by saying, basically, why do you want these things? And so Ms. Zoe Johnson, perhaps our Zoom clerk here can bring Ms. Johnson from Naval Support Activity on so that she can participate in the discussion. Mr. Jacques, Julian Jacques. We need you. Ms. Johnson, can you unmute yourself?
I'm unmuted. Good evening, Vice Chair Waldman, Commissioners.
I'm here, Bob, too.
Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Let me just remind the commission where we are with this. The one thing that we are formally tasked to do is make a recommendation on the ordinance and only the ordinance, but Dr. Nash has asked us to take a look at the guidelines, which is about half of what was given to us, And if we have any comments on that, because as we just learned, she will get the discretion to write the particular regulations on how to make these things as unobtrusive as possible. Although I must say that I doubt what they're going to be used for. I don't think they're going to be used for looking up, getting your puppy. I think they're going to be used for listening in on us. But in any case, Dr. Nash.
Just to buy the Russians, Bob, that's all, you know, it's no big deal.
It's the Russians listening in on
It's Russians.
Okay.
Yeah, let me remind you, Bob, though, that we can't effectively prohibit them, says the FCC, as much as we might want to.
I get that. I understand that. I guess there's a couple of things where this discussion could go tonight. We need to I'd like to hear from Ms. Johnson, actually. She has some fairly specific things, and I'd like to hear why she wants those specific things. Ms. Johnson?
Okay, good evening.
Yeah, I don't have a copy of what I actually sent to you.
Okay, I have a copy.
Could you,
And
can I leave it in your hands to sort of lead us through what it is, your comments and what it is that I asked you, and just so we can focus on the specifics.
Sure thing. So I am the Installation Community Planning Liaison Officer for Naval Support Activity Annapolis. That's a long title. We are the installation on which the Naval Academy is housed. We are the command that handles all real estate and planning and land use issues and infrastructure. So my role is to really work with the city and Anne Arundel County and other organizations to ensure that planning is cohesive and that we're working cooperatively between the installation and our outside jurisdictions on planning and land use and growth and development issues. So from time to time, you'll see me at Planning Commission meetings. I also work very closely with the city on their sea level rise and coastal flooding projects. But in this particular case, with regard to this ordinance, the Naval Support Activity Annapolis doesn't have any significant concerns with the ordinance. We really recognize that 5G is going to provide a benefit to the installation as well as the surrounding community. What we want to do, however, is ensure that moving forward, we're able to continue to screen and have an understanding of any new systems and these emerging technologies that are being installed outside the fence line to determine whether there would be potentially any frequency interference or impacts on our operations. We have screened other projects more recently in the past, such as a proposed Verizon small cell on King George Street there. We saw no impact. But when that came across my desk, that really was, thanks to Sally for just alerting me to the fact that permit, or that they'd received notice from Verizon for that proposed installation. So what I did was just go through the ordinance and the draft regulations and just identify places where I thought it could be improved, really for the benefit of myself and my role in screening projects, just to make sure that we would have the alerts that we needed, that a project was pending or an installation was proposed, and that the specific details about that installation would be provided in the application. You did ask, I don't know if you have a copy before you of my specific changes to the proposed ordinance and the regulations. Do you have that? The language with the additions and subtractions?
I have it up here.
I didn't print it out. I didn't print it out.
Okay. I mean, I can go over those as well. I mean, we're asking for several things. One was that in Section A under Chapter 2164, that it already requires that notice to abutting property owners be given. we're just asking that notice to Naval Support Activity Annapolis would be given. And one of your questions, Vice Chair Wallman, was why would we need notice for a project anywhere within the city? We recognize at this point in time, it sounds like the small cell range has a small range. But as these technologies continue to emerge, and potentially in the future, if additional technologies were added to the system, our zone of concern may increase. As we learn more about these, we may realize there is nothing we need to really be looking for in terms of interference, and we could decrease the zone that we're concerned about. But at this point, I don't have a certain mileage or distance zone that we're interested in. So we just respectfully requested that any project within the city be brought to our attention through notice.
So wait a second. There could be hundreds of these. And who's to identify, is each of these antennas considered an installation? And if so, who's to do the notifying? Are you laying that obligation of notifying on our poor Department of Planning? Or is the obligation on the applicant to notify you? So I'm a little concerned about, I hear your concerns, but I'm concerned about its actual operation.
Bob,
The
my
language-
thought was that, oh, sorry, Zoe, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but my thought is that we're not going to get applications for them one at a time. We're going to get applications for a package of them. So one carrier will come in with their application of, for 200 wherever, that's how I'm envisioning it. So it wouldn't be a problem to add Navy as a reviewer or just to notify them like we do for the aldermen when we get a project in their ward. We have it set up in our permit tracking software that we send them a copy. So I think we can accommodate it that way, as long as we aren't getting them one at a time, but then we'll all be going crazy. So
I think but in looking at the language, I think it's pretty clear with the suggested language that says require the owner of the system. So it's not each individual fund. If Verizon wants to come in and put in this system of 400 antennas, they're the owner of the system to provide notice of installation to Naval Support Activity Annapolis. That's pretty clear.
that's true, right?
Who's responsible?
Carrier's
Who is
responsibility.
responsibility to notify whom? Seems pretty
That's
clear to
true.
me.
That's true. Good point.
Pardon me?
So
It's the applicant's responsibility to do the notifying.
Yes.
Where's this?
So this was in the submission by Zoe through the web form. So I have that.
But what section of the legislation are we looking at?
So look on page 6, line 26.
Okay.
And require the owner of the system to provide notice of installation to Naval Support Activity Annapolis, in addition to abutting property owners, or something to that effect. I think it's pretty clear to me.
No, it just says the owner of a system shall give notice to abutting property owners.
Right, and the suggestion is to require to give notice to the abutting property owners and Naval Support Activity Annapolis. However you want to word that.
Okay. All right. As long as
But
it's
it
not
says,
Mhm.
but it says that it's the system owner's responsibility to notify, not the city.
Okay. Okay. As long as it's not a burden on planning and zoning. I don't, this is, they got enough to do. All right.
It just adds one more person they have to notify in addition to abutting property owners.
Well, it sounds like it's done automatically. Okay.
So this is Joel Braver from Office of Law. I would also add, would you also look at this legislation with the eyes towards the prior conversation about what might be in regulation such that maybe it is a part of our regulations that the application requires notification to these things or whatever the case may be. Or it might be the case that, so again, some things, is this legislation as streamlined as possible such that the minutia doesn't bog down the legislation, but the clear policy guidelines are there, and then the discretion necessary for the application is separated into regulation.
So in other words, focusing in on just this particular section, it would simply say that small cell systems are subject to standards set by the Department of Planning and Zoning, and including that not only the budding property owners, but that naval support activities shall be notified, period, according to standards. And okay, and then you cut out all the rest of this. But what about B? Initial installation, but anyway, it needs to get rewritten and simplified if you want that to happen. I'm not going to do it here. But you know, you need to say that it includes not only the initial, but also any subsequent modifications.
And again, the only limit on regulation is that it must affect the law. So once the law gives the director the opportunity to create an application process, set regulations around removal, set regulations around whatever different things are, then that could arguably go to 2 paragraphs, and then the delegation of authority, most of the text moved into regs. Again, the simplicity is there. Once we have a efficient way of doing the regs, and that was a subject to a different discussion earlier on.
Okay, Dr. Nash, are you comfortable? Okay, all right, Ms. Johnson, could you carry on to your next request?
So I think that the discussion you just had about the code versus the regulation would answer, Vice Chair Waldman, your questions 2 and 3. Both we asked for specifics about all equipment and subcomponents, and then carrier and carrier networks to be included in the section C. And I think it's already listed in the regulation that information be provided. My thought was if it was in the code itself, it would carry more weight and it would be carried forward into promulgated guidelines and regulations. But okay. I understand, based on the conversation on the prior public hearing as well as this, you're thinking of changing the approach. So regardless, if it remains in regulations, we will continue to track that it stays in those regulations and comment to that effect, because knowing the equipment, the subcomponent, and the carrier network is important information for us to be able to screen for interference. I'm trying to read down through your other questions. You asked about why we'd want to know whether the carrier network would be changed. Again, that once these are installed and ownership changes or carrier network changes, we would want to be able to screen for potential interference and operational impacts once again. And the last question though, number 5 that you posed is a little bit different in that in the regulations right now under licensed frequencies, the city has stated, for their benefit, rightly so, that if there are any frequency interference issues with the city's networks, that the carrier would have to change. We are just asking for the same consideration. So if a frequency interference issue were to be posed that was interfering with the Navy's frequency, that we would want to work to see if a different frequency could be used.
That's already in the guidelines, but not in the statute.
That is in the guidelines with regard to the city, but we were asking for the Navy to be added to that concern over changing the frequency if needed.
Okay, given the way we're going, that request is directed to Dr. Nash. Follow me? Okay, so, okay, my fellows, is there anything, what would you like to do here? Mr. Arnett?
I'm not sure where we are in the process, but this isn't the first time this has come to the city. And the last time the city rejected it because only Verizon was requesting this,
Right.
and they would not allow other carriers to use their system. Verizon, particularly in Ward 1, I think they wanted 42 locations. These locations had to be very specific because there's a line of sight. And we discovered that if we gave Verizon what they wanted, it would preclude any other carrier from having these cell phone installations, particularly in Ward 1. And so we would be giving Verizon de facto a monopoly. What we said to Verizon is, we can approve this as long as you can share it with other vendors. They didn't want to do that, so they went away. But I think that's very important that if we're going to have a whole bunch of different providers coming in and wanting all of their different telephone poles and corners of buildings, I don't know that there's going to be enough spaces. And I think that if each of them are using different frequencies, the very thing that Zoe is bringing up, Ms. Johnson's bringing up, multiplies many times over if they're all using different frequencies and so forth, that we would really be filling up the bandwidth. So that was my concern about this legislation, was the experience we had the last time this came forth, which I think was 2 councils ago. It was Joe Budge that put the kibosh on it, so it was at least 1 council ago. But we really need to be thinking about how many of these approaches we're going to get, and whether we're granting a monopoly to first come, first serve, and precluding all the other carriers from being able to do this. And I don't see anything in the legislation, nor have I heard anything in the conversation that addresses what I think is a real fundamental planning issue.
Dr. Nash?
We require co-location of facilities. They have to show that they can't be co-located if they aren't going to be, but that is a requirement that they first explore co-location of the facilities.
Is
Now,
that
does
in here?
co-location does that mean 2 antennas in the same place? 2 separate antennas in the same place?
Yes.
Potentially 4 separate antennas. All hanging on some utility pole?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure how that would look, but
Sally, have you seen the
Plus,
new
each one
equipment?
of them has those 2 control boxes?
I don't know.
Each of them is getting.
That's a good question. I haven't seen an image of 2 on one, light pole or something.
Or 3 or 4. How many now providers do we have? We have Verizon,
T-Mobile,
and
AT&T,
and AT&T. So that's at least 3.
Sprint,
Right?
Sprint.
No, T-Mobile and Sprint have been given the go-ahead to join.
I'll have to look and see if that co-location if anyone has said, never mind, we don't want you to co-locate. I don't know, if I haven't heard of any jurisdiction that said it's worse than the alternative. Most jurisdictions require co-location. So,
okay.
So that's a jurisdictional requirement, that's not a federal requirement.
No, it's a jurisdictional requirement.
But each one of them has their own power box, and they're all the 2 boxes, and each of them has to have power going to its antenna, correct? And a fiber optic cable to each one of these antennas.
Well, the fiber will probably be added later, which will be a whole nother mess because they'll have to do all this digging. But right now it's just the antennas and the control boxes.
This sounds like an interim technology. Okay, I repeat my question. How would the commission like to proceed with this? We have a piece of legislation which is far too complicated. It needs to be absolutely simplified into some very, very clear, simple policy directives. And all of the complication and detail needs to be put into a guidelines manual, which ultimately will have more effect on the city, you know, than legislation will, in a sense, if you know what I mean. I mean, because the devil's in the details.
You could make a recommendation for what is in the ordinance that should be moved, you know, like the lines. It's hard to know since we don't do these that's not how we've traditionally done our code. I wasn't always sure what should go in and what shouldn't. So
Well, it'd be fairly
I
easy.
pretty much did what the county did.
Does the county have any guidelines?
Yes, and they're similar to our guidelines that are in your package.
Yeah.
What's the county's ordinance look like?
It looks a lot like our ordinance.
I mean, does it have, like in the section 2164, does it have that amount of detail, or did they move that to a regular? I think that's the kind of thing that Bob is referring to, in
Right.
terms of it's just got too much stuff in it. There's just a lot of minutia in here that, you know, probably shouldn't be in here, could be in a regulation.
Right, and could be imported fairly easily. I mean,
I think I
basically
did
copy and
probably
paste.
put more of that in ours than the county has in theirs.
So then, just as we did with the traffic, if we start to look at the legislation, we try to draw out of each section what is the policy which is being proposed. Starting on page 2.
So do we want to take the tack similar to the APF ordinance of leaving it open and come back with some detailed suggestions next time versus trying to sort of wing it here?
Yes, but who's going to do the work of sort of drawing out, you know, it's not that difficult, frankly.
Yeah, I'm happy to volunteer to do this one.
Okay.
Since you volunteered to do the traffic one.
Right, because the policy is fairly clear. There needs to be an agreement, and you know, you need to put in basically what the agreement needs to.
Probably looking at 2164, 565 is a good start, because that probably, I think that could all be moved. And to look at it again, but those kind of standards, that kind of detail might be better. And
yeah.
It's a one sentence thing. Small cell systems shall be subject to rules and regulations as promulgated by the Department of Planning and Zoning. And those rules and regulations must, you know, include at a minimum, but not, what's the word? What's the damn legal language? At least, but at least the following 5 topics or something. So that, okay, notice, co-location. I'm just off the top of my head here. Plans. Okay, whatever. You follow me? It's actually pretty easy. Makes our life a lot easier. Okay.
Joel, you owe me.
I got you for lunch.
Oh, that's how it's done. Now, moving on though to if we're going to leave the public hearing open, it sounds like the proposed process, and at some point we should probably take another look at the guidelines. Not so much for the stuff that we just talked about importing a lot of the detail and into the guidelines, but sort of what they look like, you know? And I don't have much to go on here because I don't know what other areas jurisdictions have done.
Well, I think the things we have to think about are what's really pertinent to our context. And I think Ben made a couple of salient comments last week about that, specifically, a lot of places have very narrow sidewalks with poles in the
Uh-huh.
middle of them, and
Right.
we want to not permit, headbangers, of these cabinets to be there where people can, cut their forehead open, because, that's where they would be on some some pole in a suburban neighborhood that's got a lot of grass around it. Things like that are very unique to our context. I think that's the lens we have to take to this set of guidelines, which I'm not sure where you got it from, Sally, but it seems to be fairly generic. That, I don't know, for all we know, this is something Verizon sort of is distributing around to municipalities as sample legislation or sample guidelines or whatever.
It's like a Frankenstein from several different jurisdictions.
Yeah. And, who knows that stuff, who knows where that came from, but, I mean, I don't mean that as a criticism that,
No, I mean,
these people are
I
trying
don't
to-
know. I didn't know anything about small cells when I
Yeah,
started
me neither.
working on this. So
I think that's the danger that I see in importing anything from another jurisdiction is, whether it's, a model code or a design guideline or whatever, is, what works one place might not fit in our context. And of course, we all know that Annapolis is a special snowflake. Nobody has the same problems we do, of course.
that's true.
So,
but I
everybody will tell
welcome any comments. Please. I'm happy to do any revisions or anything.
Yeah,
So-
I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that as a criticism to you. I just
I know.
that's the view.
And I think
that's
we
the
also
view
need to decide some, in terms of policy, some aesthetic policy, safety policy. It can be as simple as, nothing should protrude on the pole where a pedestrian or cyclist can be injured in any way. It's something that's policy. Look, here's okay. Alex has volunteered to propose an essential rewrite of this legislation. Major simplification of it. Maybe the rest of us for homework could go through these guidelines, some of which we're not going to understand, but some of which are relevant to us, and help Dr. Nash with some of the specifics. And that might help, and then we can move it along. Okay? So there'll be a major rewrite. Is there anything else? Okay. Is there a motion to continue this public hearing until the next opportunity to review it?
So moved.
Okay. And I'm leaving it open because it may not be the next meeting. I don't know what we have as agendas. You know what I mean? I don't want this to jam up something which is much more pressured. So I leave it open with that. A second to that? Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
There you go. All in favor of that, the motion to continue this to the next available and appropriate opportunity?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, very good. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that we have reached the end of our agenda. Is there anything that anybody wants to add?
I like having more meetings so we get done at this time and not 2 hours later. Because I'm getting up early these days, so
Yeah.
like 9:30 is my bedtime.
One of the things I might
You're
suggest
old.
is, one of the things.
No, I
that-
get up at 5 in the morning, go bike riding.
Oh, God.
So anyway,
So
Sally,
I
can-
have a question. Is the new, did I miss something? The new business, the resolution, was that just for FYI or something?
What's that?
Did we skip something?
Oh, sorry. No, it was just the resolutions for the fees and the fines that go with the small cell legislation.
That
So
will,
we didn't have to do anything with it, right?
No, it's just for your information.
Okay.
It was
thanks.
I think it was referred to, but I don't think you make a recommendation on the resolutions. So
Ms. Hook, those things travel along with the main legislation. And,
Yep.
and they will travel along with us and we'll sort of deal with them, you know, when we deal with the main legislation as well.
Didn't we do that already tonight? We did a lot of
Yes.
talking for it.
Yes,
Okay.
we moved to continue the public hearing on the small cell legislation.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
and the fines and fees and we'll travel along with that.
Okay.
Okay,
And I just want to add one quick thing. I was approached the other day about joining the planning commission, and apparently this person who was interested sent in a resume 4 weeks ago and hadn't heard back. And then they just left me a message saying there's no vacancies. And that's because the website, I think, planning commission still has George Matthews and Bill Harold on it. So if you get a chance, if there's any way you can take that off, that would be helpful.
I'll tell Hillary. Do you know if she sent her resume to Hillary? Or Keith?
It's a he, and I'll double check where it went, but he said
Okay.
he sent it to everyone and there was no response. And since then he's already backed out. So
Oh,
he said they really
okay.
don't want me. And I said it has nothing to do with that, really. So
Yeah, just make sure it gets to Hillary.
okay, I'll do that. And thanks again for having Melissa and Jennifer. To me, it helps getting public housing on the map for, I think, comprehensive planning and all of that. So I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, that was a good suggestion, Diane.
was it Diane's suggestion? It was really good. I agree. It was a really good thing we did tonight. And I'm really serious about having Eastport Terrace Harbor House and that community, whatever it's choice grant or whatever it's called. We need to get this on the table quickly.
Can you imagine? There's so many great things we could do because it's like the confluence of great things and lots of people. And I think partnering with some of the philanthropists or philanthropic people in town might work too. I mean, we just have a lot of opportunities.
Well, that's what I want her to just give us kind of a wish list, an imagination list. You know, what are some of the properties that you've been looking at? What are specifically, start to get more specific, because I want to funnel it into I want to, like you did, we're bringing it to the surface. And I really.
And the nice thing is she's been invited to come to the Eastport Civic Association and address the board. So that'll be great too. I want them to feel welcome in our community discussions, just as we feel welcome there. So
yeah, I know.
Anyway, that's all good.
She's good, and she's got a competent person with her. That was a good half an hour. I mean, it was really well worth it. Let me go back to one of the things Alex Pline said about meetings. You know, when we first started the second meeting, regularly scheduled second meeting in the month, we were still in the chambers, and the only night that the chambers were open was this fourth Wednesday. Well, that puts us sort of, you know, in sort of the beginning of the month, and then near the end of the month, and then boom, 10 days later, the beginning of the next month. And so with Zoom meetings, we don't have a chambers problem. We don't have a real estate problem. So
Yes, we do. We have a Zoom real estate problem.
oh shit. Well, anyway, I really think that strike that, please.
Yes, it is very frustrating.
It's possible to do first and third, or first, you know, something.
We can't, there's only 2 Zoom accounts. There's the city council Zoom account and there's the board and commission Zoom account. So we have to make sure we don't have any conflicts with any of those, which we probably do, because that's how we got the fourth Wednesday. There's also not that many hours in a day that Julian can spend fabulously hosting these Zoom meetings. So it's, you know, there's a personnel constraint and there's a technology constraint, unfortunately.
Okay, just saying, if we could even start rescheduling whoever is in charge of all of this, it would just make more sense that sort of first and third would.
We're having the same problem with the Forest Drive Eastport sector study meetings, because I'm trying to get the chair, Bill Reichert, to have them all on these Zoom with us through the city board and commission Zoom, so they can be broadcast on YouTube. But that limits the scheduling of these committees, and he's trying to get it done by October. So he's just hosting them on his own Zoom channel. But I'm just worried because then people can't watch, people in the public can't watch it, but.
I have, yeah, during this time, I have a lot of meetings in the evening now, a lot of Zoom stuff because I work with a lot of volunteers. It would be easy to have it like at least on a consistent basis that it's, every other Thursday or something.
Oh, maybe we could have a different time of day on a different day.
Or just
Would
every other
that be
Thursday
possible?
or, I would just like it to be more consistent that it's not Thursday and then Wednesday, It's just easier for me to say, like, to schedule something else on the opposite Thursdays or the opposite Wednesdays. And with doing it this way, it's just kind of like it's kind of messed up having it on Wednesday and a Thursday.
It's not ideal.
Okay, it's not ideal, but it may be time for reorganization or rescheduling of a lot of this. You know what I mean?
I'll talk to Hillary about it. Maybe there's some rearranging we can do.
I see Ross has his hand up, I think.
Yeah.
I see.
So this is a perfect thing, Dr. Nash, for you to do, and Mr. Waldman. We're already starting to touch the contingency fund. Finance Committee did that on Wednesday. And I think we do need to get more help for Julian, and we need to get more Zoom accounts. I don't think this situation is going to go away. I can tell you we had an in-person meeting of the city council earlier this week, and I was quite uncomfortable, and was particularly uncomfortable when certain members of the council would pull their mask down when they wanted to talk. And I kept saying, that's when you need your mask on the most. So I think we need to stay virtual for a while, and we need to have a budget reallocation because I find these Zoom meetings actually much easier to do than the in-person meetings. I'm growing to like them a lot. I don't want to see council chambers ever again.
The other thing is, well, we have Mr. Brathwaite here. I saw this memorandum from Mr. Lyles about what's supposed to be happening with evidence and so forth with these meetings. And it talked about responsibility for the evidence and so forth. And frankly, I thought that it did not reflect an understanding of like how things actually occur and who's to be responsible. I mean, ultimately, I think it has to be any staff member who's associated with any item on the agenda is got to be the person responsible for holding on to this stuff. Or Mr. Contingency Fund, Ms. Hook is hired to do that coordination between all of the boards and commissions, handling and all of this stuff, which is falling on staff, which has,
Oh my God, that would be amazing. That would
be amazing. Wouldn't that be? But Mr. Lyle should understand that he is asking for something which basically is almost impossible to be done in a Zoom atmosphere. I don't have it in front of me right now, but I'd be glad to go over it. Just tell him that the answer is Hook.
So I'll be happy to take your comments back to Mr. Lyles. Again, we are seeing it where it's anything that's appealable. So if it's appealable to the circuit court, it's not every event that you guys have that we are mandating this. It's anything that's appealable where we must present the record to the circuit court in the event of an appeal. So I think that if we look at it with what things are there appeals rights to, then I think that that's the proper scope of things. It's not anything that would not be subject to an opinion that gets, or a result from the planning commission that gets appealed to the circuit court.
Well, I think if the Office of Law would like to make sure that the record is kept more clear, and that's not the right word, if the record is kept more accurately and completely, okay, then maybe it should consider donating some of its budget to putting Ms. Hook in charge of these things, so that some of it comes from a law and some of it comes from planning and zoning.
Give her a raise.
If you want that record to be clear, you got to put somebody in charge of it who's responsible for it. Anyway, that's enough of that.
Well, so an email to me puts these things in play. I agree with you on Tammy. I also agree the Office of Law is right. We have to protect these things for appeals. and they take effort, and somebody has to do it. And I agree with Julian. We are running those guys ragged. They do a fabulous job. I hope you're
Yes.
listening, Julian.
Making notes, Russ.
We need to make the resources available. So I'm the chairman of the finance committee, and when I get the email, I'll respond to you, but also copy all the appropriate other people in the city.
Who's sending the email?
You can send it. Sally can send it. It's probably easier and safer for you to do it, because I think David Gerald might think that Sally's trying to go around a corner and pass him by. But
I'll take care of it.
Tammy serves the boards, and so the boards are the ones. And if the boards are having more pressure to preserve materials, the boards need to ask for whatever help they need to do that, to meet that.
And it wouldn't be that much more money to have Tammy be full-time. You know, it would just be a few more hours than she works now, and benefits, and then that's it. So, and it would be great.
Yeah, it would be great. I'm on board.
We can't see Tammy's face. She could be crying right now.
She could be. It's true.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is 9:15. It is, it only leaves Mr. Pline 15 minutes to
To get some warm milk and get his bedtime story.
I'm a hot cocoa guy myself.
I will entertain a motion.
Don't forget, September 10th, John Corrin is going to give a presentation on biking in Annapolis.
You have to send around a reminder.
I am tomorrow, but
Okay, thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, do I have a motion to adjourn?
A move.
Second.
Is there anybody opposed? The motion passes. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening.
Good night. Thank you.